call-in forum. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andy Wettig, Executive Director of the Airport Restaurant and Retail Association, and welcome to our first call-in forum of 2022. Indeed, it's our first webinar ever, so we are coming to you with pictures now. Thank you for joining us. As many of you know, from the beginning of the pandemic, ARRA sponsored nearly 70 call-in forums to inform and engage concessionaires, airports, airlines, and others in the aviation industry. We hosted leading experts from airports, airlines, concessionaires, consultancies, and government. Some of whom are on the call with us today. And we all discussed the devastating impacts and challenges of the pandemic, as well as plans for the future as we all traveled from the depths of the pandemic through an uncertain and uneven recovery. ARRA retired the Survival and Revival call-in forum last December, and we now advance the conversation from survival and revival to recover and flourish. Today, we premiere our new webinar format for the ARRA forum. After all, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and we can now offer more interaction between you and our guests or presenters. And we also know how busy everyone has become as the recovery is continuing. So we're changing the frequency from weekly to monthly, beginning in 2 weeks on the first Monday or Wednesday rather of every month. But we're keeping the time, 4 p.m. Eastern, for an hour. And most importantly, though, our mission is unchanged: to inform and engage all of us in the aviation ecosystem as we collaboratively discuss strategies and solutions to evolve a sustainable and resilient airport concessions industry that enhances the passenger travel experience. So before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. I know you're all very familiar with webinars these days, but you're all muted and your cameras are off, but we do want your engagement. If you have a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom or browser window, and we will be monitoring it throughout the presentation. And with that, on to today's show. I'm very pleased to welcome Chris Demitz of SSP America and John Cugasi of Paradies Lagardère. Today, John and Chris will reprise their presentations from a recent ACI-NA Commercial Management Committee meeting. To evolve a sustainable and resilient business model, all stakeholders must understand a basic premise: how concessionaires make money. For this forum, John and Chris will discuss concessionaire income statements to show the impact of the current business environment and the challenges concessionaires face in their ongoing recovery. Their insights are certainly important information you can use. John is the Vice President of Marketing for Paradies Lagardère. He's responsible for all aspects of marketing function, including Rfps and the company's concept portfolio and brand relationships. This is John's third assignment with the company, having previously held the position of Senior Vice President, Planning and Development from 2011 through 2016, and providing consulting services since 2016. Prior to that, he held various leadership positions in the industry, including Director of Concessions at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, where he managed the concessions program for the world's busiest airport. Chris is Vice President of Business Development Finance for SSP America. He has a Bachelor of Science in Finance from the University of Delaware and a Master of Business Administration from Georgetown University. He has spent the last 24 years in the airport and travel world, with roles at Continental Airlines, America West, Host, and now SSP America. Welcome, John. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks.
And with that, John will start.
Thanks again, Andy. And I want to start by thanking everybody for spending some time with us this afternoon on a topic that I know many of us are passionate about. And I think before I start sharing some slides, I wanted to talk about, at least from my interpretation, what this is about, maybe what it's not about. It's really the heart of this is about providing an exceptional platform, exceptional programs in our airports for the traveling public. And it's all about, for me, the premise of, in order to provide a program, whether it's on the street or in an airport, all parties in that transaction need to do well and need to thrive for the ultimate customer service. And so is part of that, and something in wearing my airport hat when I had one. I always wanted to understand the fundamentals of those transactions. So it starts with business modeling. I'm going to show you models. Chris is going to get a deeper dive into some models. It's not answers you can take and then say, oh, I get it, I have it. And the reason is because there are many, many models, and even in any given airport, models change by type, by brand, even within the same given business. As sales volumes change, models change. So it's not about that. It's more of a call. If I had a call to action, it's to be interested in modeling so that you can determine what you think is fair. And again, and what something it's not, this is not a call for a policy. It's more about paying attention and understanding all the parts. So I wanted to get that out of the way. And without further ado, let me get into my slides, which hopefully everybody can see now. First, in setting up the slides, the first model I'm going to show is a hybrid model. It's a 2/3 food and beverage, 1/3 retail. So it's not for an individual business. And it's a diverse variety of concessions, sort of to give you a bird's eye view of how a program's bottom line might be. A small program, or maybe perhaps this is one part of a concourse. Then we're going to show about the impact of adverse economic changes and what that does in light of if nothing else changes. This model reflects a business achieving pro forma targets. So if sales are significantly better, a lot of sins are forgiven by very high performing sales. And conversely, if you're well underperforming your target, the numbers change dramatically as well. I've mentioned individual models very widely. Somebody said, Chris does food, John do retail. That doesn't even make sense to me, because even within travel essentials versus specialty, there's dozens and dozens of specialty models, and even the mix of travel essentials and locations would mean different models. We're going to show, pre-tax profits that are typical of the industry. Most big players that have public results, you'll see the bottom line is similar, and it's a result prior to COVID. Pointing out that street models provide greater degrees of flexibility in this. So it's important to understand that, we're locked into a lot of these numbers, an ability to address rising costs and hours, et cetera. And then, I want to say it often, the risks to small businesses, including DBEs, are very high when you look at some of the adverse effects, given less capacity to address losses in the short term. Some of the challenges you'll see, and I'll move quickly through this because I think everybody gets it. Labor is rising quickly. I modeled something that's a 30% rise from the 2019 base. When I first started doing this a couple of months ago, it was in the mid-teens. A little while ago, it was 21%. I'm speaking of my company's year-on-year numbers, labor costs. And they're continuing to move up as we continue to raise the offer and still have high openings. So who knows where it'll land, but it was based on an estimated 30% over the 2019 level. CapEx continues to rise. This model is going to reflect that for lots of reasons, all aspects of CapEx. And margin is, as you know, challenged with increasing product cost and challenging availability, and of course, pricing constraints. So here you see the first glance at a $14 million business. Again, 2/3 food and beverage, 1/3 retail. And why I said you can't, take this and say, okay, that's the model. We're showing a cost of goods of about 24% and a payroll of about 22%. Now, if you wanted to know and dig deeper, retail labor runs from 15 to in the low 20s typically. Could vary from that, of course, depending on the situation. Food and beverage is higher, from 20 to 30 plus. The reason is you're making the product. So it's and then the trade-off is in margin. Food and beverage margin is higher than retail. But both big businesses coming into a bottom line profit, it's just almost an equal offset. Together, labor and product margin typically are in the 40 plus to a little over 60% range. And if you were looking at those two items, you would add these three items, the 23.9, the 22.2, and the royalties, of course, of 4 or 5 are part of margin. So that's a little bit about the margin impacts. Other direct is significant. It's 11.5, and you might say, well, can't you break that down further? The only sizable number in that 11.5 is credit card, which is in that 2 to 3, easily, often at 3. Other than that, you get many, many, many items that are around 1%. Utilities, supply costs, storage, marketing, CAM, small wares, IT, etc. In my model, I included G&A of 5%. I will tell you that that's, having a buying organization, having a finance organization. These are essentials, and I will tell you from being in planning and strategy, it's challenging to keep it at 5%. I've been involved in several companies, and that's a best practice, and that's not easy to do. I can show you all the desks that compromise that 5% are very, very challenged, hardworking people. Depreciation, here's one that's changing in this model. I'm showing 6.5. For most of my career, my 30 plus years in this industry, it's about 5 was a good number. But realistically now, we are seeing 6.5. Of course, there's a range that's going on, but I think we all know that the cost to build is moving quickly. So that leaves you 26.4 for what the airport gets and what profits the concessionaire may have. And let's see if I can move this. Okay. So the 26.4, a typical rent, not unusually high or low, hybrid is 15%. That would leave profit, taxes, and interest of 11.4. And again, if you looked at business models from public statements, you would commonly see that low, high single digits, low, a little over 10 number. Okay, so that's the basics. Now, I did want to illustrate what's going on today. I talked about that labor increase of 30%, and what does that do to the model? You're adding a 6.6% or points to the model. That would leave you, without having to go through all the math, of 4.8%. And somebody might say, oh, 672,000, that's not bad, 4.8. If you were an investor, would you spend that money and that risk, that $9 million I think I had in CapEx for that, when you can probably get it through a bank? So it already starts to become very unattractive. Further, if you look at product and inflation costs without the ability to change that, and I know that situation varies according contract to contract, but now you start to get down to 2% and change. And it's very, very easily to understand that it's a business you wouldn't want to be into. Add COVID and the suppression of sales, and you see why we had to, as an industry, borrow hundreds of millions of dollars to get by. A large business typically had to borrow $100 million or more just to pay debt and to stay alive. So that's a little bit about what it's been like and what to expect in a business model. Summary and recommendations: to achieve high customer service levels, all partners need to run profitable businesses. That's a premise that I feel strongly about. One could argue about that, but I think that's the best operators on the street know that as well. To improve the likelihood of that outcome, managers should business model, understand what those variables are, and you decide for yourself what you think the answers are based on that modeling. With unexpected economic challenges, tenants needs tools like pricing, product, and menu flexibility, keyword flexibility, to ensure business viability. And ACDB businesses, I started with that, I'm going to end with that, face even higher levels of risk given the current challenges. And so with that, I'm going to move quickly because I know we want to leave a lot of time for questions. And I know Chris has a lot of good stuff to go through.
Good here. All right, let me get my screen up.
Thanks, John. Now off to Chris.
All right, let's see here. Can you see it? We're good? Okay, so first of all, I'm going to try to make it through this presentation without getting a frantic text from Pat Murray or Jag, the lawyer, telling me to stop talking. If I do, it'll be the first time ever. So wish me luck. So I'm going to talk about three basic points here first. One is just a common airport concessions P&L. It doesn't matter if it's food or retail. And then how that translates to the basics of financial valuation. I'll be using that model for different examples to show, how we look at how every business, every organization looks at any kind of capital investment. It doesn't matter if it's restaurants at airports, retail at airports, airports themselves with new terminals, airlines with planes, et cetera, or Wall Street. We all use the same kind of theory. And then finally, we'll look at a few examples of the challenges to the model and how they affect the value, and more importantly, kind of what's COVID's effect, the past couple of years. So the first example here is this is a normal kind of business. It doesn't matter if it's retail or F&B. The assumption here is that we got a 1,200 square foot space in an airport that cost us $1 million to build out, or $833 per square foot. We're also assuming that this is a joint venture, typical joint venture where the prime is 70%. One JV partner is 20%, and the second one is 10%. So we all contribute our fair share, 700, 200, and 100,000. Then you get down to the assumption on the actual operations of the store. So we're assuming that the sales here are $2 million. So right off the bat, just looking at the sales relative to the capital, you got 2 million in sales and 1 million in capital. That's a 2-to-1 ratio. So kind of an old rule of thumb in the industry is that's a good ratio. So you can kind of tell that right off the bat this should be a good venture. Now it all depends on the cost below as well, but that's a good start. I won't get too far into the cost buckets here, but one thing to note just for the examples going forward is on the labor side. I'm showing labor here at 30%, which is pretty normal, or $600,000 of the 2 million. So I'll just be using that as an example going forward. So in this venture, we're showing a EBITDA of 16%, which again is that's healthy, that's good. So that's $320,000 for the whole venture in the example. Then we get to the actual venture shares. That $320,000 gets allocated to each of the partners. So the prime at 70% would get $224,000, partner 1 $64,000, and partner 2 would get 10% at $32,000. And then you get through, you got to pay taxes. I show one example where one partner has debt and pays interest. Depreciation, you take that out. I know you could there's actually tax benefit depreciation. I didn't show that. We didn't need to get too technical here. And then you add back depreciation to actually show the actual cash flow of this venture for 1 year after taxes. And on the right are just some of the buckets that go into the P&L that the ACI had asked us to show. So that brings up the second page here, which is how does this translate to the actual valuation of the business? So assuming that the business is not open yet, but these are our assumptions on what we expect the business to do. So you see, and I'm showing this is just from the perspective of the prime. You could do it from either of the three venture partners. It would just be in different proportions. So I'm showing it just from the prime's perspective here. So remember the EBITDA share was 224,000 for the prime in that example. So that goes into year 1 there. And I'm assuming, I think it was a 3% growth rate over 10 years. Which is typical, normal kind of forecasting there. You take out the taxes. So I think I actually have more detail here. So this kind of isolates, it shows the full valuation down below, but this isolates what I'm talking about up here. This shows the EBITDA and the taxes, which is fairly simple. So that's the first part of the valuation. Second part is, or actually you could call it 1A, is the store build out. So you don't have a store if you don't build it. So the assumption was that this store cost $1 million, sorry, $833 a square foot. In this example, the prime, and this is typical. It's not the same case everywhere, but this is typical that the prime would pay the contractors throughout the process, the build out process. And then when the store is ready to open and everything is closed out there, the JV partners would reimburse the prime for their share. So 1 million goes out the door, 300,000 gets reimbursed from the partners. So the actual outflow is 700,000, which is your 70% share of the venture. And down below it shows the free cash flow, which is the after-tax EBITDA net of the cash or the investment. So there's no investment in year following year 0 until year 5, which is assumed at a midterm refurbishment. So the sum of those cash flows gets you the free cash flow. It's after the taxes and after the investment. Okay. So that gets you to the next slide. So this, now you're getting into the kind of the classic financial theory here for every business, again, every organization that invests in stuff. It's a discounted cash flows model, net present value model. What you want to do is you want to see what are the values of all the cash flows over the life of the business in today's dollars. So the way you do that is you come up with a discount rate, and every organization has their own unique discount rate. And it's all based on several factors, many more factors that I'm listing here. It's a whole separate day of seminars. Andy, I'm not doing that one. But it's, risk tolerance is one. What's your borrowing rate is another. We're seeing interest rates going up now because of inflation. So that would push up the discount factors. And expected rate on return on equity. Every business has different expectations, and some people would rather invest in Bitcoin or expect much higher returns, so their discount rate could be higher. So I'm using a 10% discount rate. It's kind of, first of all, it's an easy round number. So for the example, we'll use 10%. And what you're going to do is you're going to divide every year's cash flow by a factor of this 10%. So year 0, your investment, you're going to divide by 1.1, which is this 1 plus 10%. For year 2, you're going to multiply, the year 2 discount factor is 1.1 times another 1.1, it's compounded. So you get 1.21. Year 3, you multiply by, you compound it again, you get 1.33. And you keep going up through the years. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you notice in year 10, you get to a factor of 2.85, a discount factor. So you're going to be dividing your cash flows by that number, so you're almost at 3. So year 10 cash flows are going to be divided by almost 3. So that shows you what the time value of money. As you can see, some of these cash flows at so year 1, your cash flow is, I don't know if you can see it, 170,000. You're dividing that by 1.21 because that's your discount factor for year 1. Gives you 140,000. That's your present value of your first year cash flows. And it's at the end of the first year. Year 10, where your free cash flow is 232,000 up there. So it's much higher than your year 1 cash flow, or 62,000 higher. but you're dividing by 2.85, the discount factor for year 10. So when you do that, the actual present value of that year 10 cash flow in today's dollars is only $81,000. So that's actually, while the actual cash flow, the free cash flow is much higher, the actual present value of that number is much lower than year one. It's almost half, 81 versus $140,000. So that's how, the farther you get out, these cash flows are worth less in today's dollars. So the way you add up, or the way you get to the net present value calculation, it's simple. You just add up the discounted cash flows years 1 through 10, or years 0 through 10. And it adds up to 390,458. And you can check that if you put those cash flows into Excel at a 10% discount rate, you'll come up with the same number. So another check on the value here is, well, first of all, you get 390,000 positive. That's a good thing. So this, again, looks like a good venture. Another check on the value is the IRR, internal rate of return. So here it's 22.2%. So this is more complex to explain. We won't get into that. But if the IRR is higher than your discount rate, so 22% is, it's significantly higher than the 10%. That's another green light. So that's a good thing. So by all accounts, this looks like a good deal. You'd want to go ahead with it. If you can get the money or the funding, it's a good deal. All right, I already discussed that. Okay, so what could go wrong here? And the answer is obviously a lot, especially the last 2 years. The first scenario that I'll give you that can go wrong and has go wrong, and it's not specific to COVID. I mean, these things have happened, forever, and capital costs never go down. Obviously, we're all hoping that they do, because costs in the last 2 years have gone insanely high. But in this example, a store build out cost of $1.8 million for a 1,200 square foot space gives you a cost of $1,500 a square foot. This is actually a lot more reasonable to what we're seeing now. $833 a square foot. That was in the food and beverage world. That hasn't been seen since like Pat Murray had black hair, which is a long time ago. So we're at, it's not necessarily an industry average, but $1,500 a square foot is very, very reasonable. We see that, everywhere. So all of a sudden your $1 million investment becomes $1.8 million. So you're $800,000 over. How does that affect, the valuation model? It really is, it's all in year 0, but it's a lot. And as you recall, the discount is, the year 0 cash flows are worth the most, worth a lot more than, year 10. So the store costs $1.8 million. Partners pay their 30%, which is $540,000. So the prime is now in for 1,260 instead of 700,000. So that's 560,000 more. You do discount that back a little bit, but what does that do to your return? It actually becomes negative because it's so much, and it's in year 0 when the value is the highest. Now you've got 10 years to make it up, and hopefully you can. But when you go over, by that significantly, you're in a hole immediately. So the second example here is what we're seeing a lot. And one other thing on the build out costs in COVID. I mean, we're seeing not just us, every industry is seeing build out costs 25% higher and more. So it's a real thing. Hopefully, the supply chain stuff and the lack of labor will slow down. Still, I don't recall a year when capital costs have actually gone down, even in 2008, 2009. So we'll see. All right, so the second example is higher labor costs, and we're seeing this everywhere. Everyone is seeing this everywhere. in every business, pretty much. So you recall the original model had $600,000 in labor, 30%. So just like capital costs, we're seeing labor costs up, 25, 35% themselves. So this shows labor at 35% or another $100,000. So there's nothing, how this affects the model. If you look at the model up here, we go back to our original store build out. This is now in the operating line. This is in the EBITDA line. So you're $100,000 higher cost, $100,000 lower EBITDA for the total venture. 70% of that, again, we're the 70% joint venture partner, is 154,000. So remember, our original EBITDA was 224. So now we're down 70% of $100,000 because of higher labor. So that's how it affects it. And if you look at the net present value there, it's still positive, which is a good thing. The IRR now is only 11.7%. So you're a little bit above your discount rate, but it went down significantly. And this is something that everyone is dealing with right now. So the third one is, this was kind of specific here. And the reason why it's here is because the ACI specifically asked for an example of how the joint ventures can affect the valuation model. So one thing that's that we've seen from partners and other businesses is that financing kind of dried up a lot. Businesses were closed for some are still closed, but a lot of partners have had trouble getting financing. So that affects the actual timing of the reimbursement. So you recall 2018, 2019, 2020, Prime could have built out the $1 million store expecting the reimbursement. Well, then the world ended. And there was no, all financing had dried up. And, the poor partners, were trying to get financing and it just dried up. And there was, plenty of great funders, banks that are trying to help, but with the stores not operating, you just can't justify it. So anyway, this just shows a delay of 4 years here in getting reimbursements from 2018, 19, something like that. And the effect on that. So it's not as bad as the other ones. It's $300,000 pushed back 4 years. So that's the third individual example. So the last slide I have here is kind of what's going on now, or what has gone on during COVID, which is kind of everything. So everything all happened at once, all the negatives for the most part. So you're getting higher capital. One example I didn't show was lower sales, but this is obviously very common, everywhere. So you're getting higher capital, lower sales, higher labor, plus funding challenges across the board. So what happens, without getting into detail, if you look down at the net present value, all of a sudden you got, it's not impossible to make up, but you're starting out big time in the negative. Which is why, kind of the whole function of ARRA, at least the past 2 years in our discussions, is how does everybody in the industry make this better? How do we all work together? Clients, partners, primes, everyone, banks. How do we all make it better? So that's kind of the situation that we've looked at the last 2 years. So that's it for my part. I'll get there.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Thank you, John. Very interesting. I invite anybody, all of our viewers, attendees, if you have any questions, please type into the Q&A box button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen or browser window. And we will monitor that box and pass on the questions to, I'll ask the questions on your behalf. We have a couple here to start with, and I start with yours, Chris, because your model is very detailed, very specific, but it's to a project. So it's a single project, and what you're really getting at is that free cash flow at the bottom that you're discounting is referencing, shows the incremental value of the investment on a project basis. Where are the corporate costs paid, and how does that free cash flow go to covering the corporation, just the normal business costs such as accounting or legal or what?
Well, those are separate.
To run it.
Yeah. So your key word there is incremental. So that how you value individual projects is incremental cash flow. So the corporate costs are assumed to be constant. They are generally constant. You know, as you grow the business, you'll bring more support people on, but corporate costs are not in there. So just because you're showing an EBITDA of 22% or EBITDA of $300,000, that doesn't mean you still have other costs that are not shown, and that does not mean that the rest of your company is profitable, or could be. You could have many other issues. Certainly during COVID. So this one project looks good, but it doesn't mean that, it doesn't reflect the whole corporate P&L for sure.
Right. And so I think the key takeaway there is free cash flow does not equal net income or profit. There's other costs.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
To stay in business. Both of you touched on this, Chris, when you showed the case of a higher capital cost. And we know that CapEx has been skyrocketing for the past many years, pre-COVID even, it was going up there. So are the investment costs, is the $800, is that realistic? You said no, Chris. What about you, John?
So, my model showed the $800 as a hybrid cost as well. And I think I'd agree with everything that Chris says. For food and beverage, you're seeing well over 1,000 as a starting point. And, so the retail is significantly less. Retail's more in the, 600 to 1,000 plus. Food and beverage have been more, like I said, 1,000 and over. If you talk about the coasts, now you're talking 1,500, 2,000 a square foot. Mm-hmm. So, the 8-9 for a hybrid business, getting close to 1,000 feels about right now. But the thing is, where's it going to end?
Yeah. And I would imagine that the sales line has not grown at the same pace.
And the other thing that really brought back a lot of nightmares, Chris was talking about the project costs and CapEx. Almost never been involved with 3 major companies, countless performers. Almost never are you under or to any major degree under your CapEx. It's just the nature of the beast but many times you have overages that are huge, just things that can be nobody's fault, but surprises when you go to build, surprises in suppliers, and running $1 million over, which can shoot almost the majority of the profit of the project, is not uncommon.
Mm-hmm. So Andy, it actually brings up a good point of, almost all of our contracts now, everyone in the industry, were signed and originally awarded before COVID. So these were proposed based on a whole different world. Hopefully we get back to that world, but we're based on a whole different world. If post COVID, a lot of these, the way companies, have bid will be different. They will reflect these new realities of higher labor, higher build out costs. So they reflect any change, significant change to a contract. And this is not capital, but the pouring rights, if that pouring rights is a big issue. Obviously, it has been for several years. If you bid a contract with no pouring rights and no expectation of it, and then all of a sudden you're in a contract and that changes costs significantly, and that really affects the valuation model. That's why there's such pushback. If there's pouring rights in a, communicated in a proposal, then you can work around that, usually with lower rent or, capital or something like that. But when it happens after the fact, that's where like real trouble happens, whether it's controlled or not, whether it's a act of God or, pouring rights type thing.
I think just sticking with the capital cost for a moment, have either of you, well, let's go back to pouring rights for a second, because our friend Cheryl at SFO just sent in a question. Can you give an estimate, either of you, on what the percentage increase in costs is from a pouring rights agreement?
100%. No, I don't. It's a couple of percent. We've looked at it several times. Depends on how big a contract, what the restaurant styles or store styles, but it can be a couple points. And in these contracts, where you see a couple points over 10 years adds up to many millions of dollars, or can add up to many millions of dollars in just lost cash. So it differs, but it's significant.
It's higher, I would say, in retail, particularly travel essentials, where reading materials used to drive everything many years ago. Folks that know that now, if you're doing a best practice in designing a travel essential store, you want as many coolers, because the traveling public is all about variety, is all about hydration. And so you want as many coolers as possible. The major brands tie up, as you know, they have many water brands. It's not just about Coke versus Pepsi. It's about Dasani and on and on and on and on. So number one, we believe it impacts sales. Maybe most importantly, it impacts customer satisfaction. People can be emotional about the right to get Coke versus Pepsi or their favorite now, water. So it affects service levels. It absolutely affects sales. And, it's just, I think there's got to be a better way. If there's money that's needed out of a contract, there's better ways than penalizing the customer. I think is what ultimately happens.
Yes. Yeah. Just to clarify, Chris, when you said 2 percentage points, is that 2% of your total costs or 2% of your cost of goods? 2
points higher in your whole cost. Again, just a high level estimate, but yeah.
So basically 2 points off the bottom line.
So if you have a $10 million contract, 2 points, was that $200,000 a year?
Right.
It can hit you.
Okay. Now go back to the CapEx for a moment. Have either of you started any construction this year or tail end of last year?
Yes.
Nodding. John's nodding. Have you seen an increase in costs from just pre-COVID, from 2019, early 2020?
Over
Yes.
25%.
Yeah, easily. Not only challenges with that, but it's even shortage of materials and having to be creative at times. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence about bidding on drywall and et cetera. So it's got to be very sharp and creative these days.
Just ordering equipment. I mean, you got to have some of these things take, you got to have 4 to 6 months to order, so you got to have everything all planned out and know before you're even ready to build. You got to order that stuff, or you're going to wait 6 months because they don't put them on a boat for a long time.
Right. So there's a couple. So it's not just price; it's also availability, and it's extending the entire build-out period.
Yeah. plus the whole contractor stuff. They can't get, laborers.
Right.
I don't know where everyone went, but everything has, added up to over 25% increase in construction costs.
So switching gears a bit here, a lot of costs you're showing a lot of costs there. John, you had a 5% line for G&A. You said that's very well managed G&A. What are some of the costs that get covered in that line item that aren't broken out? Not necessarily the numbers of those costs, but what's in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a corporate center. You need to manage the business. So, there's buyers. So starting with merchandising, and you need people to buy the product. Accountants. This business is it's a challenging, fun business, but it's, we operate 40+ brands in each of retail and food and beverage. So you think about the amount of work that's got to be done from an accounting side as well. So it's just it's a lot of administration that needs to be done in order to manage that.
And Chris, you weren't showing those because those costs all get paid by the free cash flow.
Yeah. Well, everyone has a different P&L. Yeah. So I was showing store level P&L. He was showing a whole business level.
Yeah, we took different approaches. We didn't collaborate, but I will tell you, if you were trying to compare line items, they're very much in sync. A lot of individual things all make sense. Everything in his model was consistent with mine. Mine was a business as an investor on the street, or if you wanted to own and go into the business of concessions, what would you look at? And Chris's was a completely different view, which I think is helpful, which was definitely more accounting centric and what you would have to look at when evaluating a project.
Another question has come in. Have there been over the past couple of years or even before COVID, are there concession opportunities that you have not or don't plan to bid on and propose because the RFP does not recognize these new realities?
Yeah, for a large company, I could say, and probably every large company, of course, there's things you just have to pass on because it doesn't make sense in terms of the company's goals and parameters. But I will tell you, if I looked at the past 6 months compared to most of the 30 years, the percentage of things you have to pass on is much greater. And I know there's been some recent RFPs that have gotten a lot of attention. One thing to understand in this business, if you have very high sales volume that some major hubs offer, if you're doing $4 million plus in a small space, it forgives a lot of sins and you get a lot of interest. But unfortunately, that's not the reality of most spaces across the country.
Yep. Yes, I've seen some. And I think what everyone in the industry is looking for is, flexible MAG language. MAG is not, it's not the end of the world, but just some flexibility in, decline in employments. As we, no one ever anticipated this. I think 2008, 2009, we had a drop. It was nothing like this. 2001, there was a short-term, in September, short-term drop. Nobody anticipated 2 years of this. We're now in year 3. So, we're all looking for flexible MAG language, and just flexibility and knowing that, the industry is not back. Passengers are, for the most part, 80-something% back on average. It's not the same passenger mix that we had 3 years ago. You got, kids going to Disney World instead of business people flying out of New York to San Francisco to Hong Kong with a lot more disposable income. So it's very different right now. So, the business is just different. It's not, it's workable, but we're looking for more flexibility.
couple questions have come in, as you really extend upon what you just said there, Chris, is what kind of what suggestions can you give to reverse some of the negative impacts of the pandemic? And going along with that is a question about what should airports consider when they prepare their RFPs?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, flexibility. I mean, obviously the number one concern here is creating a first-class passenger experience, and making sure, that all the customers that want service can get service. Some flexibility, in operating hours. When there's no flights, but the contract says you still have to be open until, a lot of airports or a lot of airlines have cut their flight banks. They're condensing them. And you've seen, we've all been through airports probably where there's, the last flight is at 6, where it used to be 10 o'clock. Some store, just some flexibility in the hours, because when you still have to staff stores when there's nobody around, that gets very expensive over, really quick. Flexibility in the MAG, obviously, flexibility, in pricing without, beating a dead horse. When you have, street pricing, yet wages have gone up 35%, or pricing language, even if it's 3 + 10, but wages have still gone up 35%, and cost of goods, is going up everywhere. You see, what's going on with inflation. Flexibility with being able to adjust. To me, that's the biggest thing, and it really just kind of covers a lot of areas, but just reasonable flexibility, we'll say.
If I was managing a major program, again, this is all about a call for modeling. If you model, then you could understand what's affordable. But from an airport's perspective, I'd look at the CapEx world real hard, right? So what are things that they can do if they run a model and it's not really satisfactory for either or both, right? Term, so term is an easier thing to do, and we could all argue the downsides of longer term, and so even some of those downsides can be adjusted for. But also clean white box, the way you provide the facility in a way that is easier to build out, and even beyond clean white box is TI or tenant improvement dollars that airports may, in some cases, have access to dollars through infrastructure, through other things that help them ultimately reduce that risk of CapEx. Flexible format, not being real prescriptive about where walls go, et cetera, being, let the best come forward. I always wanted, as an administrator, the best and most forward, and I know I'd get the best program. So the less prescription, the better. So on the CapEx front, I'd look at that. Labor, it's about providing it. We all need to partner on the best work environment we possibly can do. We need to, I think both sides can do better on technology. I think that's happening, but technology is important and could help lower costs of labor. And I think we've got to continue to investigate surcharges where things just aren't working. And I think the passenger will, anecdotally at least, is understanding that. And it's a way to address that. And then I would say untethering price controls. One of the things that doesn't make sense at all is where you can only change prices like once or twice a year in an inflationary environment where you're getting hit like crazy. And some of those hits are huge. It just doesn't make any sense. So I'm a huge proponent of not being street pricing. The concessionaire has every motivation for a happy, satisfied customer. But you can't, to me, street pricing doesn't make sense unless everything else is street. Average street rent, average street build out, all of that. Otherwise, again, it doesn't pass a logic test.
And one of the things you mentioned that is common on the street that isn't common in airports is tenant improvement allowances.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you, Andy, because that it is, you know, not just common, but becoming increasingly important to do that. But by the way, I don't want to mislead anybody, and I don't want to. I want it to be understood that this has been a partnership through these past couple of years, and I know on behalf of ARRA and the concessionaires, we're grateful for that partnership to get to where we are today. So it's been working. That partnership has been working, and I'm thankful to all of our airport partners for that.
Yep, agreed.
Agreed, very much so. Well, we have pretty much come to the top of the hour here. One of our guests today, if either of you have anything you want to add, that was a pretty good closing as it turned out right there. That's your two comments.
I got no text from Pat Murray or Jag, so I'm
No
good.
text from Pat.
Win.
That's even more impressive.
I would say
That'll come in a minute.
don't let this be the end of the conversation. You know, I remain open and available for questions and discussion and debate, all of the above. I think the more we communicate, the better we provide, you know, the best possible environment for travelers.
Yep.
Okay, so today our guests have been John Cugasi of Paradies Lagardère and Chris Demitz of SSP America. On behalf of the Airport Restaurant and Retail Association, all of our viewers and listeners, my sincere thanks for joining us today. Thank you for a very informative presentation. And in the words of one of our friends in this industry, well done. They made the numbers less boring. So good job, gentlemen. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope this webinar has given you information that you can use. Please join us again in 2 weeks as we continue the conversation about evolving a reasonably sustainable and supportable business model. Our guests will be Annie Russo and Matt Cornelius of Airports Council International North America. Until then, take care and safe travels. Goodbye, everybody.
You guys.